Thank you for joining us for today's roundtable conversation. We're really excited that you can join Workday and Avaap, this co-sponsored conversation that we're having. And we've invited Avaap's integrations technical consultants to talk about the key benefits and critical considerations that you need to make before transitioning from Ellucian's Banner or Colleague ERPs to Workday. So some of the topics we're going to talk about include how custom integrations are developed and managed, why you might need temporary integrations when moving to Workday Student, what does client-side integration support look like during and even after an implementation, and how does your technical team's role change after going live on Workday? Those are just a few topics. We've got many more that we can discuss as well. My name is Amy LaHate. I lead Avaap's higher education sales practice. I've been helping institutions select, or I should say evaluate, implement, and optimize ERP systems in the higher ed space for about 25 years. I actually started my career in higher education, student services, career services at MIT, Northeastern University, and American University. Obtained my master's in higher ed administration, and then I spent 14 years at Ellucian implementing SIS systems and providing account management services to Banner and Colleague customers. Then moved over to the Workday ecosystem in 2017, and I haven't looked back since. Super excited to be here with you all today, and I'm also going to turn it over to my partner in crime, Analia Morrow, who's going to be facilitating today's conversation. So, Analia. Oh, you're on mute.
Yep, we had to have at least one year on mute. I mean, it wouldn't be a webinar, right? So my name is Analia Morrow, and I work with our higher education and some of our other industries, but higher ed is my focus and my passion. I come from the client side of more than 30 years. I like to say I started counting at 29 years of higher ed experience as a registrar, faculty member, AVP for enrollment management at the first school to go live with Workday recruiting and admissions about 10 years ago. I have my PhD in higher education administration. And at Avaap, I focus on our customer experience and the innovation and strategy that we bring to our higher education clients. So really excited to be able to spend time with our panelists who we will introduce and let them tell you more about them, but we're going to keep it pretty informal. We want to make it conversational so that you can get as much out of this as possible. Amy, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about housekeeping.
Sounds great. Thanks, Analia. Just wanted to note a couple items. This session will be recorded. We'll distribute it to any institutions that registered. You probably will get that link either by tomorrow or early next week. This is an Avaap-led conversation, but as Analia mentioned, we want it to be informal. So we hope, because we have a larger group today, please feel free to post questions in the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat throughout. Depending on how much ground we cover, we might have an opportunity towards the end to take some folks off mute and do more of an open Q&A. I did want to mention that we had a few Ellucian Banner and Colleague customers come to us to request today's topic. But the majority of what we talk about will apply to any legacy ERP. So I know we have some institutions who are attending today that may not be on an Ellucian ERP system. And then finally, wanted to thank our colleagues from Workday for co-sponsoring today's session. We just appreciate your partnership and the fact that you helped us bring everybody together today. So I think here, I just wanted to spend a minute or two introducing you to Avaap. Just so you know who we are, we're a Workday certified implementation partner since 2016. We have over 400 consultants who provide end-to-end transformation services from ERP project readiness through implementation all the way through post-production support. And we've been working with higher education institutions for over 20 years on their transformation initiatives. So you can see a snapshot here of some of the institutions we've worked with some of our Workday implementations in the middle. If you'd like to learn more about Avaap, we've included some additional information on our consultancy practice at the back of this deck, which you'll receive a copy of. And the last item I wanted to touch on before we get started is that today's session is actually part of a larger roundtable series that Avaap is co-sponsoring with Workday. We started in the fall. We have other recordings that are available to you on change management if you're interested in obtaining those. But our goal is to provide monthly ways to engage and come together to help institutions evaluate, prepare, and become educated on what do you need to do to successfully implement Workday. And we also have special packages and pricing as part of this offering. So I'm going to include my contact information at the end of today's session, should you be interested in learning more. And enough about the beginning. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists, and we'll start with Vivek first.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for joining this webinar. My name is Vivek Dikshit. I'm the Integrations Director here at Avaap. Been with the firm for the past 13 plus years. Out of those, the last 5-6 years have been in the Workday ecosystem, implementing Workday platform and Student. But yeah, that's about me. Charlie?
Thanks, Vivek. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Charlie O'Leary. I'm an integrations and extend developer at Avaap. I've been with the Avaap team for about 3 years now, and I've worked on a handful of implementations for higher ed, most of which have been coming over from Ellucian. So excited to get started.
So excited that you all are sharing your experiences with us and with our attendees today. Vivek, I'm going to start with you. And I know that you've worked with a lot of Ellucian clients and those coming from other legacy systems, as Amy mentioned, certainly is transferable. But let's focus on the institutions that are coming from Colleague and Banner with Ellucian products. What have you seen as the capabilities and some of the differences that institutions tell you they're facing, what they've dealt with in legacy and how it is as they go to Workday?
Right. Thanks, Analia. Yeah, thanks for the question. Basically, the higher education projects that I have been part of, that I'm closely associated with, especially on the Banner and Colleague side, what I've experienced was a hint of like chaos in those implementation on the Banner side, struggling to do things and with expertise or how things are done over there, which I've not experienced with the Workday side. So Workday is more seamless, appears to be more seamless implementation, and so that's what I would like to call it out. Things are more streamlined in the Workday system. Before 5 years ago, I was with a different ERP, and things were different. And mainly it was because of the way these systems are built. Banner and other legacy systems, they are built on relational database systems. Mm-hmm. All the nuances that come with that. But Workday was built from ground up, and it has an object-based system that enhances all these capabilities, that allows cross-functional collaboration with the functionals to happen more seamlessly. So if you have a question, you are working side by side with the functionals and resolving that issue. So that is one of the things. The second thing is the Workday has more than 500 pre-built connectors for HCM and financials, and a ton more on the Workday student side. So when we are working on the Workday integrations on a project, we are working not from scratch, but we have these connectors, excuse me, to leverage that can get us closer to the end goal and in a shorter time frame.
And those are also supported by Workday. So as new releases come out, do you want to talk about how they test those and how stable those integrations are? Or there's something that you need to maintain as new releases come out?
These connectors and these EIBs, these are configurable technology, for example. And whenever a new release, and Workday releases new Workday issues new release twice a year, whenever these new releases come up, Workday updates these connectors and these technology automatically behind the scenes. All the customer needs to do is to test them out as part of their release cycle. So twice a year release cycles, you just need to test that this file is being generated properly, or this output is going as per the contract of the API. So testing is involved for sure, but it's minimal testing.
I think you and I were talking about this recently, that it finally clicked. We had found, as we were talking with potential clients, that they focus so much on integrations and not as much on data conversion. And we have found integrations to be a very stable experience, and data conversion being an area where clients can really focus their attention more and make sure that things are where they want them to be. So anything else you want to say about the APIs or the approach before we talk a little bit about the custom integrations library and the different kinds of integrations that are available?
One of the things that's a pretty big is the concept of configuration over customization. That's a pretty big thing on Workday side. So if on a large enterprise, large higher education customer, you would typically see 100 to 200 integrations across platform, HCM, financials, and student. Out of those 200 integrations, you would see a majority of them are based on this pre-built connectors and EIB configurable things. You don't have to touch them and then modify them. These are pre-built connectors that you configure. The remainder of the integrations are kind of minority integrations. They are dealt with, they're more complex, complicated requirements, and they are built using Studio technology. But even for those minority Studio integrations, Avaap has built a repository of Studio CLAR files and custom BERT report designs that we can use and that we can bring on a project to jumpstart the discussion and build.
That makes it much more efficient. Let's look at some of those types. I know you talked about EIB, which I hope I get my points for the day. I think it's an enterprise interface builder. So we can look at and then Studio you talked about as well. So why don't you go through the different types and explain the differences, and then of course the things that we have in our library as well.
Correct, yeah. And thanks for pointing that out. EIB is Enterprise Interface Builder. It basically extracts data basically gets data from a custom report. And custom report is not really custom as in you are doing a lot of things, but generally a report designer is there. You have data sources that you can pull the columns and pull the fields into the custom report, and it is available to the EIB. And then EIB has a variety of delivery formats or file formats that are available right out of the box that you can use to immediately or build these EIB integrations faster. These are file-based integrations. So if you have a CSV file or XML file or a pipe delimited file, variety of files can come out of this EIB technology. The one in the red is Cloud Connect. These are the connectors I was talking about. These are pre-built by Workday. And there are 500 plus on the HCM and financial side, and then there are several on the student side that Workday maintains, and we just need to configure them based on customer's help. So these are the connectors. The document transformation at the bottom is something where you need to transform your data in some way. This is like XSLT. In XSLT, we also transform the data, but Workday has created these library of faster, effective XSLT functions that you can use to basically speed up the development process. Out of all this, yeah, so these are all pre-built configurable things. If there are some minority requirements that cannot be dealt with these, then there is a Studio technology that Workday provides. It is a IDE tool, Eclipse-based IDE, integrated development environment tool. I'm sure many of you are aware of Eclipse IDE, which is an open source tool, and Studio is built on top of that. So Studio provides all the necessary components that will allow you to connect to the tenant, Workday tenant, and then export out the data to the third-party system. So Studio technology is used for more complex requirements, and it takes the maximum effort. So that's what I wanted to call out.
And so those, just for clarification, those types of integrations, we usually suggest that we take on at the beginning while a client may not have those skills, and they can upskill their integrations team if they choose to, their technical team, to be able to take on Studio integrations later or maintain them later. But any of these would be possibilities at some point, or just some of these for clients to use.
That is correct, Analia, yes. So initially we invite the customer to get their feet wet with the EIBs. They are the simplest type of integrations because the customer knows their data, they know their data sources, which data source would be used. They create a report and then plug it into the EIB, and then out comes the data. So the EIB is the first technology that we propose the customers start using.
That was the first one I used for sure in the early days when we first went live with recruiting and admissions. If we went to a high school, a lot of times they had dampening, from cell technology, so we couldn't connect some things, and so we had to have the prospect cards sometimes, and to be able to come back and load the EIB and get those students in and start the communication process immediately was very valuable. And that was before we were able to get the high schools to open up the Workday link and let us in. So very helpful. Yeah.
Also, the customers need to understand that this implementation is fast paced, and people kind of may feel the stress of using their, working on their day jobs as well as supporting the Workday implementation. So at that point, it's a little bit helpful to get their feet wet slowly rather than delving into the studio. So that's why we recommend that approach.
Right. Yeah, I know that is appreciated, that we don't throw them in the deep end from the beginning. Why don't we give some examples of some integrations that we frequently see? And these are just some samples. Of course, as you said, there may be 200 on a project, but you want to walk through some of these and maybe other examples that we've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. So over the past few years, we've collected or curated a handful of pre-built integrations just from our past experiences and past projects. So we've got, some of those examples on the list here, like time tracking, Jaeger, financial aid connectors, anything related to student payment information, really any common integration systems that we see through multiple clients, where even though there might be a little bit of differentiation, we know that to some extent there's going to be a lot of similarities in how that's built out or the overall use case. We've also got anything from your financial aid award letters and how to handle mass printing those, to your transcript generation, to your legacy system integrations, and we'll kind of dive a little bit more into those next. But there's sort of we call it the vault at Avaap, a large integration repository where one of the sort of cutover items as we're going through a project is saying, okay, these artifacts, we know that they're going to be common use, and we want to be able to store this information if it ever comes up again in the future. And I think at this point we've got at least hundreds of pre-built integrations, whether of all complexities, whether they be connectors, EIBs, studios, API solutions. Really, it's just dependent on what the solution is, and especially for studio integrations. One of the things that we've noticed is, while it might differentiate based on a vendor that you're interacting with, the overall solution for importing or exporting data is very similar. So even if it's not an exact match, we've still got that starting point. So on day one, we've got a path forward.
Yeah, Charlie, you talked about our integrations being in a vault, and I know that there is a perception by some customers that they've had an experience where an implementer came in and put things in, and it was sort of a locked area that they didn't know what had been done. But I think we really have changed that mindset. And could you talk a little bit about our design and technical specs that we do for each of these integrations and the knowledge transfer? I know I'm throwing you an extra question there, but I think it's important to talk about so that it's not just our vault where we start, but we're really giving that and making sure that we close that loop on the knowledge too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, one of the most important things, at least that I've noticed through all the projects that we've been working on, is, that cohesiveness with the client is extremely important, because eventually there, is going to be a day where, you've gone live and this is your system now. And to an extent, you want to be able to maintain it. You want to have that level of self-sufficiency. So in all of the integrations that we work with, whether it's HCM, financials, student, or otherwise, we have sort of a preset list of items that we want to go through. So this is going to start in our architecture phase, where we're just getting an understanding of kind of what that integration is going to look like. Then we develop the design of the integration overall. That's where we're really drilling into this wheel here, where we're determining, okay, what's this solution going to look like? What are the different technologies we're going to have to utilize? And the client is involved in that entire process. So we're going to be talking about, their existing solutions, if there's ways that we can optimize or deprecate previous systems, what the change is going to look like. So we have our pre-built design documents. So we have one for every integration that we work on. And that's our source of record for starting out. And then once we get into that build and testing process, we really iron out the details and get everything pretty streamlined. And then once we get closer to that phase of getting there for go live, then we also will have a knowledge transfer or a KT document for every integration that we've built. And that's going to walk through, the overall understanding, overall purpose, any stakeholders, whoever's going to be involved in the process, anything from scheduling, notifications, where we're retrieving data from, where we're sending data to, whatever it might be. It's going to be different for every integration, but all those key information details that you need in order to be able to look at it and say, okay, this is what it does. This is how we need to make a change. This is how we can understand it. So having those items and making sure that we have that visibility with the client is really, really helpful.
That's great. I like to say that we help clients become as self-sufficient as they want to be. Of course, we can be there for phone a friend and any kind of post-production support, but there are folks that just have a small team or they need to be focused on something else for a certain period of time. And so it's nice to have those design documents and the information to know what has happened so they can help troubleshoot and then have us there to help as they move forward. You talked a little bit about temporary integrations to the legacy system. And everybody has this perception, I often hear, that we're just going to go from one to the other. And in reality, we need to do some feeds back and forth, certainly for those who are moving into student as they go live with HCM and financials and payroll. We need to still bring data from the student system, work study, other things back and forth to make sure that everything's going well. So would you talk a little bit about temporary integrations and what that looks like? Looks like?
Absolutely. So I love talking about these. These are kind of the main focus of my work. So I get a little excited about it. Probably more excited than most would, but the main purpose of these integrations is to serve as a placeholder. So between your HCM financials, your platform go live, and your student go live, there's a time period where both systems need to be able to coexist. And as a result of that, you have to exchange data back and forth to make sure everything's still working while we're finalizing that student build, and then eventually moving everything over to Workday as the source of record. So if you want to jump to the next slide, I've got a list of some of the integrations that I can kind of talk about. These are more of the common integrations that we've typically seen at all of our higher ed institutions that are implementing student. So starting off at the top of the list there, we've got our external student integration. So this imports like a shell record of students for a couple of different reasons. It lets us hire student workers without having to go through the traditional candidate recruitment process. You can hire them directly off of that student record. So it makes it a little bit simpler there for your HCM team. It also allows students to access your internal job site. If you choose to have one, we can create a Workday account for them, also using SSO if we want. So they can go in and have that access to that internal job site. Next up, we've got our work study awards. The name itself is pretty self-explanatory, but any of that work study related payment info that you want to bring in for payroll, we feed that into the Workday system. We've got our GL sync. So this is all the student financials related information that you would need to feed into the Workday financials system. This could be your bursar, your advancement, really anything student related financials that you need to keep track of. Fourth on the list, we've got our HCM sync or our HR sync. So this is for the opposite direction. So any newly hired workers that you need to feed back into your legacy system for any student-related processes. The best example that I like to use that comes to the top of my head is, you hire a new instructor, but they need to be able to, get assigned to a course. They need to be able to do their job. And this is what allows us to do that. We've also got, our payroll deductions for any student-related systems that need to handle that. So this could be your cafeteria, your parking, vending machines, anything where you're going to have that drawdown from payroll. And then finally, we've also got our donor contributions. So this is any student-related gifts that get brought into the Workday system. Every client is obviously different, and they're going to have specialized requirements. But typically, these are some of the ones that we see that are really common, especially these top 4 ones. I have not worked on a project yet where they haven't all been needed. They're really important, especially for that time period until your student go live.
Right, right. And those student payments, as they make those, having those reflect in the general ledger. And I think you talked about how things go back. So work study is a great example of getting the amount over that they have available for each term. And then as the payroll is completed, sending it back to the legacy system so that everything is in sync and students aren't over awarded there. So great examples. Any others that you want to hit on there?
Those are really the main ones. Some of the other ones that we've run into are, academic advising appointments. We have some outbound from Workday integrations for some of the ones that are listed, inbound and outbound, like you had mentioned. So for payroll deductions, for general ledger, for work study, like you had mentioned, sending that consolidated data back to the legacy system, especially for things related to payroll. So work study and payroll outbound integrations will send the official award or the amount that's been awarded and send that back so that you can draw down balances on the legacy system size for that exact reason that you had mentioned. So you don't want to, over award anyone or have any incorrect amounts. It keeps that sort of seamless connection in terms of those amounts.
Right. And we do carefully document when these temporary integrations will be sunsetted, how long they'll be in place. So, some of these are in place for the entire student deployment, which can be a year or two. So important that they're still documented, strong, stable integrations, but good to know that they'll be sunsetted at some point. Talking about maintaining integrations, I want to shift a little bit to what the client side role looks like. I know that it can feel a little daunting to know what kind of expertise they need, what kind of skills they need to have going into the implementation. What do you typically see as skills, and what kind of backfill do you see as most helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, apologies in advance if I sound a little bit like a broken record, but it definitely differentiates for everyone. There's no 2 identical institutions, but during the implementation process, typically what I've seen is we coordinate with a technical team. So this is going to consist of your technical lead, 1 or 2 of those, potentially a project manager, and then depending on resourcing, 1 to 4 or 5 developers on the client side. And so that's where we kind of get into that conversation of ownership of the integrations during that implementation process, especially for those, connectors and EIBs and more simple setup integrations to help build that knowledge for that future self-sufficiency. There's also constant coordination from functional resources on the client side, depending on what the integrations are that we're working on. So they're going to help determine the needs depending on what their setup in their legacy system looks like. Depending on resourcing, that's the main number that I've typically seen, but like I said, it does differentiate, in some instances, just due to a lack of knowledge of the legacy system. We've worked with third-party contractors in order to implement those client-side changes. So there's really a workaround for any sort of scenario. You can have a massive team on the client side if you needed, and we can dive into all the ownership there. But if that's not the resourcing allocation that you have, then there's ways that we can adjust to handle that.
Yeah, very important. And there was something that occurred to me that I wanted to bring up on the skill side that escapes me. Maybe it'll come back. But let's talk a little bit about the do you see a change after the implementation in what the staffing is since everything is done? Do you see the same kind of model? And also, are these folks that are often involved in other things? Is it just integration? Are they also doing security or data? What do you see their roles are? I'll turn that to you, Vivek.
So on that question, what I have seen is that the same team is responsible for data extraction and the integrations, and that creates a lot of stress. So it would be helpful if Avaap has a tool which is called Craft tool, and when we engage with the customer, we show them that tool, we give it to them to analyze their staffing situation, what the Workday implementation project will need from them on a weekly basis. And that gives a good picture of, okay, if we need this role at 50% weekly allocation, then how will that translate to your day-to-day job support? And that's a very good tool that many customers are finding it very useful to staff their team. So I would highly recommend taking a look at that tool sometime.
Yeah, client resourcing and forecast tool. So that's during the implementation. And then after go live, do you often see that one person to kind of keep their hands on the wheel of integrations and making sure everything's going well, error handling is sufficient? Is that something that they need to plan to escalate, or they need to expand their team?
So again, it depends upon the size of the institution, and various institutions, they deal with this organizational structure differently. So some institutions which are large and they have large IT departments, they may have a larger Workday integrations team even post go live, because there are things that they need to cover. For example, when these new releases come up, they need to test the integrations along with the functional team. Also, for some phase X deployments, like new upcoming projects, they need to keep that team going and trained for development work, for developing new integrations, because these new changes come up, new requirements come up as the institution progresses forward. So one person will not be sufficient for that. But again, this is a discussion that should happen between the OCM team, that it's a separate OCM team that we have called Organizational Change Management. PMO drives that discussion with the customer, and then the customer needs to identify what the future state would look like during the implementation, so they have sufficient time if some kind of org structure needs to change before go live, or how will that support structure looks like. For integrations, AMS also comes into picture quite a bit, because when there is an AMS contract, application management services contract, which is a post-production contract, the customer has a set of buys, a set of hours that they can use for integration development during phase X, or for existing changes, such as benefit plans change, for example. Then you need to modify reconfigure the integrations. So for those, AMS services are available with Avaap, and so yeah.
Thank you, Vivek. Charlie, I remembered what I wanted to ask you about the skills on the client side, because you mentioned that the functional team is involved and heavily, and that is a significant change from a lot of legacy systems where the technology team, the IT team manages most things with the ERP with very little involvement with the functional team. Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like and how even our teams work together we talked about the functional design document, but I think that's a really important piece to know that the functional folks need to be involved in each step of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so there's a few different areas where we consider the involvement from the functional team. From the integrations perspective, it's dependent on the integration. Typically, what we'll see is there's going to be work stream designations. So, for example, for student, you might see your admissions teams or your student recruitment, whatever it might be. And so that's more of on an ad hoc basis where depending on, questions related to the setup, we'll reach out to the functional team. But one thing that we also do is we have weekly work stream and cross-functional meetings as we're going through this project for a couple of reasons. One is knowledge transfer in and of itself. So the Workday team is assisting in demoing what the Workday system is going to look like. So they've got a better practice of it. So when that go live day finally comes, they're ready to go. And along with that, it's also allows us to get a better understanding of what their legacy system looks like, so that when we're working through the configuration and builds of our Workday tenants, we can configure them in a way to match up a little bit more with their system. So there's that level of familiarity.
Great. Why don't we talk a little bit along that vein? Let's talk about some of the efficiencies and innovations that we bring with our strategy. Vivek, I'll go to you first to talk overall about what we do and what we've implemented.
Correct. Yeah, thanks, Analia. So basically, when we talk about integration efficiencies and strategy, I think the main goal is project success. And the project success, we continue to think about reducing the cost to the customer, creating the timeline of the project in an optimal fashion so that the customer does not feel rushed and the implementation happens successfully. So those are the basic things that we need to keep in mind when we talk about efficiencies. And we can think about that from 4 or 5 different angles. First is like during the project delivery, when we are actively implementing, when the teams are coming together and then identifying requirements and design and then building all that. So it's important that the AVAP team, it collaborates with the customer very closely and and at an early stage. So even for integrations, the sooner we start the discussions of integrations, the better it is. We can educate the customer on the pitfalls or some of the gotchas of the integrations that they are going to come across in the later part of the cycle, later part of the implementation project. That project delivery efficiency we focus a lot on. Then the second part is engaging the customer right from the get-go. We assign customers depending upon their appetite. If it's a big IT shop or like not that many people in the IT, depending upon their appetite, we assign simpler to moderate level complexity integrations to them, so they can get their feet wet and they're ready to take on more challenging complex integrations using Studio later on in the project or even after go live. Then we bring in reusable code that we have talked about already from Vault that kind of jumpstarts the project or the requirement discussion and it gives a jumpstart to that. We always employ dedicated student integration resources to the project and platform specific integration resources, so to cover the skills gap. So there's no skill mismatch there. Also, whenever there are some niche requirements, because it's a large enterprise transformation project, there are some niche areas where we need outside help. We also partner with third-party consultants to provide consulting or advising services on those niche areas. So that completes the whole spectrum, and we continuously keep thinking about project success in that fashion.
I think that that's so important to step back and think not only how do we configure for project success, but how do we think about how the institution can come with their resources? So they're going to need the functional team and the technical team that we would suggest. That you talked about the client resourcing and forecasting tool, the craft tool, that we give a good baseline of what we've seen based on the size of the deployment, how much time each week folks can expect to spend. But we have had a lot of success with projects where we have brought in client side functional leads or client side technical leads, and those work really well. So we can do as much or as little for on the institution side as is needed. And Charlie, I'll put you on the spot and say, is there any difference that you see when we take on more of those tasks for the institution so that they can focus on the things that they need to get done other than the Workday project?
Yeah, I would definitely say the main thing is the learning curve. That's, from day one, the biggest thing when it comes to our client technical and functional resources is just them having a better understanding of the Workday system overall. Because, switching ERP systems is a pretty big undertaking, and for, some clients, they've been using certain ERP systems for decades. So it's definitely that level of change. So when we take a little bit more of ownership, especially in terms of building out integrations, then that allows the client to have a little bit more time to focus on, those cross-functional calls where they just are interacting with the Workday tenants, and kind of seeing how that object-oriented style in Workday works, handling like the search bar, related actions on objects, searching for items, creating reports, whatever it might be. So that's the biggest thing that I've noticed. Yeah.
So I know that budget and staffing is always a concern. And when we think about, Vivek, you talked about the staffing that we usually see during a deployment, and yes, it's different. What do you see as some of the drivers on where we might see staff augmentation needed for a school and where we don't? And I can add more if that doesn't make sense. We'll start there.
In the past, I've seen that those integrations that Charlie mentioned about, like the temporary integrations where Workday is feeding data into Banner, Ellucian, or other legacy applications. That's where the customers try to use third-party consultants, third-party needs. Also extracting data in some of the cases, because these ERP systems, they have been there for so long. The customer, in some cases, the customer lost the main expert for Banner or Colleague, and then they are falling short on the skill set. So that's where we see it mostly.
Yeah. So staff augmentation is a nice opportunity to have a fixed cost to cover something during the deployment and then not have to have those resources afterwards. You can let the resources that you're going to continue with, as I said, however self-sufficient you want to be, so they can upskill and understand how to support Workday post-deployment. That's good. Any other questions that have come up? We want to open the floor and see what kind of questions we have gotten from you all that are attending and see what's on your mind. I really appreciate Charlie and Vivek sharing their thoughts and their expertise. I see that we have a question from Brian. Oh, good one, Brian. So Vivek, I'll go to you on what would you suggest for an institution that's thinking about going to Workday now? What are some strategies they can do in advance of Workday to be better prepared for conversion or to help the implementation go more smoothly?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, planning for the future. I think the first thing would be to use something like to understand what that backfill role looks like, identify the best person for the implementation to be acting as the integration lead on the customer side. That customer side integration lead role is a critical role. It can be two different people. Like, for example, like HCM and financials is supported by one person, and then later on, when the student project comes up, that same person can support it, or it can be a different person, depending upon the approach that you think. But again, that integration lead role, staff, think about that, and then when the project starts, you would go through the training. The Workday provides credit for those trainings, so that person would go through the training. But this person is a very crucial kingpin for integrations delivery. So I would think that is one actionable item if you wanna think about that.
I know you talked about training, and that would be my recommendation. As soon as you have the opportunity to send people into Workday training, I would start that. We talked about that continuum of training Charlie did that we do throughout the deployment, but anything that the folks can do ahead of time to start getting ahead of training would be great. I know that someone has to drop and had a question about data conversion and validation. I hope you can join us this afternoon, because this is our technical day and we are going to focus on data conversion and some strategies for looking for bad data and what is migrated and how much of information is there. So Amy, would you mind putting the registration chat in the chat for that later conversation for anyone who has questions on data conversion, so that we can answer those there?
Absolutely, can do. Yes.
Yeah. So I think, Khalil, that's along the lines of your question regarding data preparation and assessing the readiness. I think, Vivek, let's talk about it from the integration standpoint. There may be some data that's not converted that is integrated to Workday. Would you talk about the complexity of that process and how we often see that happening during deployments?
So yeah, so integrations, they depend upon data to be in the tenant. And if the data conversion team, that specific team does not put data into the tenant, the integrations team does not have a way to test our integrations, because we test our integrations with live data or demo data if somebody puts it in there. So that data conversion is very crucial for integration success. And we always, stay in close contact with our data conversion folks, data conversion team and functional team, that, okay, we need this, we need to work on this integration. We need to complete the unit testing of this, send the file to the vendor. So we must have data in there. And the data conversion team works with the technical team and the functional team of the customer, and to get that data into the tenant. So
You mentioned the vendor. To Brian's earlier question on what they can do earlier, I would add that anytime they can alert their vendor that they are going to be making a change and what that timeline looks like as early as possible. I mean, we will have formal steps where we will ask for a reach out and connect us with them, but the earlier that can happen, so that we know who to contact. Sometimes just one person has been talking to like an account person and they don't know who the technical person is. So if you can find out who your technical contacts are at your vendors for integrations, that would be really helpful and a step forward.
also, to add to your point, Analia, also think about what are the mission critical applications on your side. Typically for higher education, student recruitment, these kind of applications are mission critical. And then if you decide to replace them at the same time as Workday, that would create some stress, and then it would pull resources apart. So think about it from that angle as well. How much stress your teams will have if you implement two mission critical applications at the same time.
Yeah, that prioritization, leadership, communication, all of those things that are traditional organizational change management and leadership, but important as pre-work to Brian's question there as well. Any other questions that we have from the audience? Amy, as you've listened to, while folks may be typing, I'll give you the opportunity. Is there anything that, as we were going through the questions, that you thought from your experiences might be helpful tips or things that you've gleaned?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about staff aug. I just know working with Banner and Colleague customers in the past, there is always that concern of having a smaller team, like, and how do we do it all? And I know we have our craft tool. We have had one-on-one conversations with, institutions. That's something I would imagine we can offer up if an institution wants to sit down and talk with us to get a better sense of what their resourcing needs are.
Yep. I would be happy to do that
Yeah.
and support wherever's needed, wherever we can. Integrations, I find, I may have said this earlier, but we often hear so much concern about integrations as they're coming from a legacy system, because those integrations, as Vivek said, are very fragile, need a lot of care and feeding. And it's so different in the Workday world that the integrations are very strong, they're very supported. They don't have a lot of fuss needed. And that allows the team to really focus on getting data conversion and transformation right, integrating to the right things. So very helpful. Chuck is asking a question about iPaaS. Vivek, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, like there are iPaaS platforms out there for Workday deployments. The Workday deployments that we have been part of, we have not integrated with iPaaS in the sense that, okay, this is a separate thing, but Workday has a very good, robust integration platform itself, that it would be an overkill to use any third-party iPaaS if there is any. But it depends upon the strategy that the customer has internally in the corporate strategy to use one particular iPaaS tool. It may depend upon the resources that you may be having who are skilled in iPaaS and so on. So it depends upon that, but Workday integrations, they typically do not need a third-party iPaaS. The Workday platform is pretty robust.
Chuck's happy with that answer. Well done. Maria clarified in the chat that the craft tool for resourcing and the custom integration library that we have are things that we've created, but the Workday the Cloud Connects come from Workday, and those are supported and given to all the deployment partners and clients. Other questions? And I hope that we have some repeat folks who can join us this afternoon for the data conversion conversation. I know that's always a hot topic as well. The technology is exciting, and thinking about the possibilities.
If we don't have any other questions, I would love to be able to just share some of our upcoming events. I think I mentioned earlier that today's session is part of our larger Pivot to Workday series. So in January, we're going to be having a great conversation focused on Workday financial aid. And we're already in conversations about expanding our series through February, March, and April through the springtime on other student-related topics. So you can come here and save this QR code and register for any of our events through the QR code. And I mentioned earlier, if you prefer to have a one-on-one conversation, my contact information is here at the bottom of this slide. You'll get a copy of the deck and the recording today, or you can feel free to reach out to your Workday account executive. But if we don't have any other questions, I just want to sincerely thank our AVAP panelists, Vivek and Charlie and Analia, for facilitating today's conversation, and for all of you for taking the time out of your day to join us. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
everyone.
Thanks all. Take care.